Back to the Future was released in 1985 and it was directed by Robert Zemeckis, was produced by Steven Spielberg, and stars Michael J. Fox and Christopher LLoyd. The film follows a 17-year-old teenager named Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, and he seems to be a friend of this old wild-haired scientist named Dr. Emmett Brown. One night, Dr. Emmett Brown proves and shows Marty that he managed to create a working time machine out of a DeLorean, and it runs on plutonium. However, before they have time to celebrate, a group of terrorists attack, and in an attempt to escape, Marty jumps into the DeLorean and accidentally travels back in time to 1955. And so he now needs to team up with the 1955 version Dr. Emmett Brown, and the two of them need to work together to get Marty McFly back to 1985, or as the title suggests, Back to the Future. Now, I've been a fan of Back to the Future all my life, and it's one of the most iconic movies of all time. I have yet to meet a single person who doesn't like this movie. Back to the Future is a movie trilogy I've honestly been wanting to do for quite a while now, almost about a year actually. Now, it's true that I did get multiple requests to do this trilogy, however I'm actually doing them just because I wanted to do them anyway. So people were just asking me to do a review I already wanted to do, so it's a win-win. But one thing that really baffled me is why. I know Back to the Future is a very iconic movie. I mean, this movie is so iconic that every aspect of the movie is iconic, and I mean everything. And so I really wanted to look at this film, and when I watched it again for the sake of this review, I wasn't just watching it just thinking, oh wow, this is a very iconic movie and this is fun. But I really wanted to analyze and look at this movie and answer the question, why? Why is this movie so good? I found it kind of baffling considering it must have to do something right in order to become this popular. And honestly now think that the answer to that question is surprisingly simple. And that is just this movie's incredible entertainment value. This movie is incredibly entertaining. It is just very fun. It's just a very fun movie. This is one of the most light-hearted movies I've ever seen in my life. Everything from the music, the photography, the style of the directing, the way the film is directed, the way the film was written, the way it was acted, the look, the overall, everything about this movie just speaks fun. It's just a very delightful film, and it puts you in a good mood every time you watch it. This is also a very, very quotable movie. There are so many quotes that people remember from this, both funny quotes and serious quotes. One of the most popular is, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. There's lots of other ones as well. But as well as being incredibly entertaining, there are some other things about the movie that I did really, really like. For starters, the movie's opening. I love the opening of this movie, and I find it really mind-blowing, because when I really went down and really thought about the story and all this stuff that we needed to know throughout the story, we needed to have a lot of exposition, because there's a lot of stuff we had to know. We need to know a lot about what Marty McFly is like as a person, about his character, what his family/parents are like, what Emmett Brown was like, and the overall history of Hill Valley. There's all this information that we need to know before we get to 1955, and this is a very fast-paced movie, and the movie does an excellent job of throwing all this exposition at you extremely quickly, without making it feel forced. It doesn't feel like they're just giving all this information. It feels natural. It feels like we're learning, and it doesn't feel forced, basically. It doesn't feel like exposition. All the way up to the Twin Pines Mall scene, every single scene is trying to show you something new. It's trying to teach you something about this world, or about this character, or something like that. And that's something I love about this film. I find it very impressive how much information we get to learn within just a few minutes. And also, this premise is just, well, it's amazing. I just love the idea of this premise. Like, how many other movies can you really think of about a teenager, high school kid, that goes back in time and accidentally have his mother fall in love with him, unaware that it's her future son? The story is really kept simple, and that's something I find mind-blowing. It's a movie about time travel, and yet it is very easy to follow. And I think the main reason why is because the time travel, despite the fact the whole film revolves around time travel, the time traveling aspect is only kept to a minimum, because there's only like 3 time traveling sessions in the entire film. when they first test the thing and they send the dog out 1 minute into the future. And then there's just 2 more. And that's basically the transportation between Marty going to and from 1955. So there's only 2 specific years the overall movie takes place, so it's kept really simple. They also established some really good important rules behind the time travel, so it feels very limited in a way, and so it doesn't feel like a gimmick in a way. Like a lot of time travel as a plot device, it's very easy to screw up. Either it can cause a ton of plot holes, it can cause a ton of unanswered questions, or if you can just simply time travel at will with no consequences, it just feels very gimmicky, very confusing, and there's really not much to the story. It's not that much fun. However, there are lots of rules with the space-time continuum, and trying not to screw the space-time continuum or trying not to screw up certain future events. And since there are all these rules, it does allow the stakes to get pretty high. It's becoming a very, very engaging story, and it really does suck you in from beginning to end, and I think that's a great thing to do, especially since it's a time travel story, which is a very, very deadly story arc. Simply just because it's very easy to mess up. And as well as the amazing story, we have the characters, and I know I'm probably not the first one to say this, but Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd are perfect together. This is one of my favourite movies of all time that has 2 people as a main protagonist, like they're working together to sort of achieve this similar goal. And me saying that this is one of the best is saying a lot, considering basically all of my favourite films of all time have this kind of concept. Terminator 2 Judgment Day had the T-800 Arnold Schwarzenegger and John Connor. Inside Out, Joy and Sadness. Speed, Keanu Reeves' character Jack Traven and Annie. Zootopia, Judy Hopps and Nick Wilde. Toy Story, Woody and Buzz. You get what I mean? Like, there's a lot of movies that have 2 main characters working together to sort of achieve the same goal. And out of all of them, I think this one does it the best, and that's just simply because Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd were basically born to make this movie together. If I said Michael J. Fox or Christopher Lloyd, you may think of a couple of their other movies, but the very first one that comes to your mind is Back to the Future. And that's because their chemistry of them together is fantastic. It is incredibly entertaining. There are so many one-liners, so many iconic lines, and they do share a very good, genuine friendship, despite the fact it's one of the craziest friendships you can think of. A 17-year-old high school student with a wild, mad scientist. They somehow became friends. I'm really interested in seeing how these 2 met, actually, because it's such an unlikely friends, and yet it works. It feels like they are very good friends, and they are incredibly entertaining together. Some of the scenes between the 2 are flat out hilarious. I also love how Marty McFly is also really well introduced into the movie, because within just a few scenes you know a lot about this character. You know that he's a bit of a nerd, he's like a bit of a coward, he's a very socially awkward person. He only has like 2 friends, Lorraine and Dr. Emmett Brown. He's doing really poorly at school because he is late all the time. He's embarrassed with his heritage. He has an embarrassing father, embarrassing siblings. He lacks self-confidence. He doesn't think anyone likes the stuff he does. And he loves playing guitar, but the lack of confidence and the love to play guitar do not go hand to hand. And we learn all of this about our main character within just the first few scenes he's in, which is a great idea because he feels like a human being because he's incredibly likable and very entertaining, probably just simply because he's played by Michael J. Fox. But it's also the fact that he's a genuinely flawed protagonist. That and this guy's just incredibly likable and entertaining, so yeah. One of the best protagonists ever. The film doesn't really have much of a villain, but I guess you could maybe count Biff as a villain, because Biff is just one of those guys you absolutely love to hate. The ironic thing is that I heard that apparently the person playing as Biff is actually a very nice guy. And so I don't know what they did to him, but the way his character is written, he completely changes because we hate this guy because he's just so unlikable. He is a jerk to everyone around him and his attitude. This is a guy that we hate this guy. We absolutely hate this guy, and so excellent character basically because he did his job well. I also love the chemistry between Marty McFly and George McFly in 1955. because George McFly has a great character arc because he has the exact same flaws as Marty. And so when Marty is trying to help George gain confidence so he can get the two together, since they need to fall in love to keep Marty from disappearing, and so when Marty is trying to teach these lessons to George, Marty deep inside realizes he has the same flaws, and so he's learning these lessons himself. I love how Marty has a character arc, but it's pretty hard to notice. There's a lot of life, soul, and personality put into the writing of all of these characters, because you remember everyone. And I mean everyone. Every single character feels iconic in some way. Because these characters are so entertaining, and so likable, and so memorable. They are all very interesting characters. And I love how the way the story sort of manages to keep you interested throughout the entire film. Marty McFly and Dr. Emma Brown are always in a bad situation, regardless of what it is. However, there's always something going wrong, and they are always trying to fix it. There's always some problem that they're trying to solve throughout the entire film. And so it keeps it interesting 100% of the time. There are no dull moments in this movie. And since we love these characters so much, you root for them. You love these characters and you want to see them succeed. You want to get them over their plight. You want them to succeed in achieving what they're trying to achieve. I also love the look of this film. It's not just iconic and old classic, but I really do love the cinematography of this film. I showed this movie to someone who had grown up in the 50s, and she told me that they captured the 50s perfectly. They did a really great job of really transporting you back into the 1950s. And this is just coming from someone who told me, because obviously I wasn't born back then. But I'm also mind blown on how well the special effects hold up today. Like, this movie came out in 1985. That's 31 years ago, people. And yet, all the effects and what happens, like all the scenes when the DeLorean is traveling through time, as well as maybe other visual effects, the movie holds up really well, and it looks real. It looks like it's in camera. There aren't any shots in this movie that I think look fake in the slightest. Like, this is still a very realistic movie today. And knowing that this movie came out in 1985, I'm pretty mind blown of how much the effects held up today, because they hold up tremendously. And also, it was a pretty funny / wise move of choosing a DeLorean for making it a time machine, and they say that they chose a DeLorean just because they think they want a good car that looks sort of like a spaceship in a way, looks futuristic, looks fantastical, and they just chose a DeLorean. And yet now it's become iconic. Whenever you see DeLorean out in the street, which I don't because DeLoreans don't exist here in Australia, but if you ever saw an actual DeLorean, you would instantly think of Back to the Future. And they make the car seem so cool and so iconic that it's made me want a DeLorean. And my father's explained to me that they're pretty pathetic cars. Like, one of the jokes they keep on making in the film is that they keep on breaking down. And so Dad had to explain to me that it's just a piece of junk. But I don't care, I still want one. The score is phenomenal. It is one of the best movie scores I've ever heard in my life. I love the score so much, I even made my own fan rock / metal cover of it. I'm serious, I actually did that. Off by ear, I might add. As well as that, this movie also has one of the most iconic climaxes of all time. They set up all of these rules and everything, they made to establish everything you need to know throughout the entire film. And so now that we have all this knowledge and they set up all these time-traveling rules, and the way the idea is described, and when we find out what these characters have to do in the climax, it allows to be a great climax, and it's one of the best climaxes I've ever seen in my life. I don't really have any flaws with this movie. I consider it a perfect movie. The only thing that kind of interests me is just the idea that this movie is surprisingly profane for a PG rating. Like, if you sit down and watch this movie, keep in mind that this is a PG rating movie, and try and keep track of how much they curse in this movie despite being a PG rating. I find it rather interesting how profane this movie is, just considering it's PG. But I don't call that a negative, because some of those lines are actually some of the most iconic lines in the film. I wouldn't call it a flaw, it's just something that kind of interests me. And it would be the closest thing I'd consider a flaw, which I don't really think it's a proper flaw, because it has nothing to do with the story or anything. So, I really think that this is one of those few movies that are genuinely perfect. I have no flaws with this movie. This movie is amazing, and if you have not seen Back to the Future for whatever reason, what are you doing with your life? Seriously, if you haven't seen Back to the Future yet, and I know there are a few of you who haven't, even though there's only a few people out there who haven't seen this movie, I did my best to keep this review spoiler free, just for those few people who haven't seen this movie. So if you have not yet seen Back to the Future, I highly recommend you go and check it out, because it is my favourite sci-fi film of all time. It's up there in maybe even my top 5 favourite movies of all time. It is a great movie. I'm still thinking about maybe coming up with a rating system. I haven't really found anything yet. But if I did give grades in my reviews, I would give it my highest grade, which is something I would not be doing often. This movie is amazing. Check it out if you haven't seen it already. And if you have seen it, go and watch it again, it's amazing. Stay tuned for my review for Back to the Future Part 2. I will be sure to review that relatively soon. But until then, hasta la vista, baby.